Welcome everyone to this Wominspiration, where I'll be interviewing the amazing Beth Clarke. But first, let me just say welcome to everyone who's joining us. If you're not familiar with BCS, we're the Chartered Institute for IT in the UK. We're a member organisation with over 70,000 members and many, many branches and special interest groups. So this event is brought to you by the BCS London branches, of which there are 3 working together to put on these events, and also BCSWomen. And we're supporting women and non-binary people in their tech careers, whether they're joining their careers, progressing, looking for mentorship and support from like-minded professionals. So big welcome to all of you joining us. So let me just give you a little intro to me, so you know who I am, who you're going to be hearing from today, and then I'll introduce our guest Beth in just a moment. So my name's Jo Stansfield. I run a social enterprise called Inclusioneering, which helps tech firms with diversity and inclusion. And I'm also the co-chair of BCSWomen. So I'm busy organising events like this in collaboration with the fellow BCSWomen committee, and love to have collaborations like this one with BCS London. I'm also a council member for BCS and a member of Trustee board. So a little bit of housekeeping just to get started. So I'll ask Beth some questions as we go through the interview. Please feel free to type questions into the chat and we'll come to questions, but ask your questions to Beth at the end. Please treat your questions appropriately. We're in a forum that's professional, so please feel free to ask Beth about any topics she raises, but if she's not talked about a particular topic that might be considered personal, you may want to consider if that's something that is actually appropriate to ask in this context. So yeah, we'll ask all the questions at the end. When we get there, you can either type in the chat or you can raise your hand and I'll come to you, and you can come off mute and on camera and we can just talk directly. So Beth and I will talk for about 45 minutes, and then there'll be lots of time to talk to all of you and have your questions and your chance to talk to Beth as well. So I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Beth to all of you this evening. She's absolutely inspirational. Totally love what Beth has been doing in her career, as I think you'll discover as we go through this evening's talk. I think you're going to really love hearing about everything that she's been doing. So Beth is an award-winning software engineer. She's been working in safety-critical software predominantly, DevOps, leading testing. She's a committee member of the BCS Special Interest Group in software testing, and she's currently a PhD researcher at the University of Strathclyde, working to ensure a sustainable space environment. Now, when I told my kids what I was doing this evening, they were very excited to hear about it, and actually so was my younger self. And in fact, my dad overheard the conversation and he was very excited about it. And then he told me all about how he'd been reading this awesome New Scientist special article recently about women who are working in space. Like, oh, that sounds really familiar. And he gave me the news, and it was Beth. It's like, well, here we go. Okay. So the stars are aligning. It's wonderful to have you here, Beth. Very, very big welcome. So when we spoke in our pre-meeting chat around, just getting to know each other a little bit and preparing for this, you described yourself as a massive space nerd. In my notebook, it's the first thing that I've got written. So is that an accurate description? Tell us a little bit more about yourself and some of the things that you're doing.
Yeah, Jo, that is probably the most accurate headline I could ever give myself. It is, if you asked any of my friends or family who know me and to summarize me in one sentence, that is probably what they would say. I have loved space my whole life. My office is space themed. Obviously now my workplace is space themed, and it's something I could genuinely talk about all day. So we'll try and keep it to 45 minutes tonight, but I'm really looking forward to chatting to everybody and answering their questions. So a bit more about me. So as you said, I'm a PhD researcher at the Applied Space Technology Lab up at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, where I currently am. But most people listening will be able to tell from my accent that I am not Scottish or from Glasgow. I actually come from the south of England in Surrey, a town called Farnham. So I've moved about as far away from home as I can get to come and study up at Strathclyde. I've been a PhD student now for nearly 6 months, which has gone by very quickly. And in our lab, we're dedicated to developing space technologies that help to improve life on Earth as well as in orbit. So a lot of people think space is this really far removed bit of technology, this sector that, what does space matter to me? Whereas we're developing technology that people are using here on Earth to make the world a better place. So an example of a project that we've done recently is the Safe Passage project, which is using satellite imagery to try and find safe passage through channels up at the Saltway Firth on the coast of Scotland, so that rescue lifeboats can safely get out to sea quickly without getting stuck in the mudflats in those channels. And that's using satellite data. So an application of space that a lot of people may not have thought about before. But my research, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit more detail in a second, essentially involves me trying to contribute new knowledge to the space sector. That's what a PhD is all about, is doing something new and novel. So a day for me currently looks like doing lots of reading of information online, like academic papers, but also blog posts and videos of wherever I can get my information, and then trying to turn that into some useful piece of technology that can then go out into the world, and also to turn that into other sources of information. So things like journal papers, articles. I have one published by BCS IT now recently about software testing in space, and just trying to get that information out there to help other people learn so that they can build on my work too. And then the main part of my PhD is my thesis. So this is what I will be assessed on in 3.5 years' time when I go for my doctor title, and then doing all this other work alongside that. And then a bit about me outside of my research, whilst that is a big part of my life and space is a large part of my personality. I also really love building Lego. I have a Lego space station and a Lego astronaut, and I'm very
kids love you
desperate to
even
get
more.
hold. Yeah, exactly. And I'm a bit of a big kid, really. I'm sat here with a packet of Chewits next to me because yeah, young at heart. I also love reading books, and I'm a really keen runner. And as you mentioned, I sit on the BCS software testing committee where I look after our social media. So a bit of a busy bee, but space is most of my day-to-day life, which I love.
Oh, you can feel it in the way that you talk as well, Beth. I mean, just came out of our chat, last week, just like, wow, I'm buzzing, it's so exciting. It's just very infectious. And I think there's so many things to look at and unpack in what you've just said. That's a huge range of different, things that you're doing, from the software testing to the space to the, the work with the BCS and publishing your articles. So we'll come back and we'll talk about all of those things a bit more. So tell us a little bit about your research and a bit more about maybe some of the technologies you're using. I was really curious in your description, that we put together for the event, that you're using distributed ledger technologies, and that's contributing to sustainable space exploration. But while those things all sound really interesting, and I don't get it, what does that actually mean in practice?
Oh, you're not the first or the last, Jo. Don't worry. It took me a while to wrap my head around exactly what my research was on. So distributed ledger technologies, most people will have heard of them from the world of cryptocurrency. So you may have heard the words blockchain or Bitcoin are probably the terms most associated with distributed ledgers. But I'm not developing a cryptocurrency. My supervisor often makes jokes that I should, and maybe that would pay for my research, but that is not what I'm actually looking to do.
Your side project, eh?
Yeah, exactly. To start making some
finance
NFTs.
network.
Exactly. But no, so I'm looking at the technology that kind of underlines cryptocurrencies, which are distributed ledgers. And you can think of a distributed ledger sort of as a database of information, but where every computer in a network has an identical copy of that database. And anytime anyone makes an update, so adds a new row to that database, every other computer knows about it and updates their local copy. And why that's useful is because if then somebody tries to go and change something, in the world of cryptocurrency, it might be they're trying to pretend they have more money than they do, or take back money that they should be giving someone else. If they try and manipulate that data, it then won't match with the other copies that the other computers have. And so that will get flagged and say, that's not a great transaction. We're not going to allow that. So it helps add in extra security to protect data. And what else is great about it is distributed ledgers lead to something called smart contracts, which are very similar to what you might assume a regular contract is, where two people agree on something and then something happens as a result. And smart contracts are exactly that, but they are written in code and they will get executed automatically when a condition is met. So in the condition of a distributed ledger, it would be when someone transfers X amount of Bitcoin from person A to person B, that might then set off a smart contract of, okay, that means you get a discount of 10%, so we'll give you some money back, as an example.
Right. Okay.
But I'm obviously bothered about money because I'm looking at satellites in space. So how does cryptocurrency relate to space? So in my case, my project, my research is called Decentralized Autonomous Communities in Space. So we're trying to use these distributed ledger technologies to store information on the location and movement of satellites in orbit. So satellites would collect their own data via onboard sensors, store it in this ledger, this database. All other satellites would then know where someone is saying they are. And we can then use that to do trajectory calculations to work out if there's a risk of collision in orbit. And then if there is, we can use smart contracts to say, if two satellites get within X meters of each other, perform a collision avoidance maneuver. And then that would happen automatically. So that's helping obviously to make space safer because we're preventing crashes, but it also is working towards space sustainability in two ways. The first one is through making launches more sustainable, because currently there are thousands, tens of thousands of objects in orbit around us right now that you don't realize are there. But a big impact of that is it makes new launches of spacecraft riskier because there's more chance that you would crash into something on the way up. So if we have a database knowing where those satellites are, it makes those launches safer, means we can keep going into space. But on a second front, when we're preventing crashes, we're also preventing the creation of space debris or space junk. So you can imagine when two satellites of any size crash into each other, they split off into small fragments. And sometimes that can be a couple, sometimes it can be up to 1 million micro fragments. And those fragments are traveling at hundreds of thousands of miles an hour, and can cause a lot of damage. Even something that is millimeters or micrometers big, if it's traveling fast enough, can cause a real problem. And then that leads to something called Kessler syndrome, which is this cascading effect where one collision leads to more, like a nuclear chain reaction. And we want to prevent that. So by automating these collision avoidance maneuvers, we prevent that happening too. So we're making space more sustainable is the goal.
Wow, that sounds amazing. It sounds really complex. And you're reminding me of the movie Gravity, when everything goes.
Yes.
Like, there's no possibility that we're going to have one of those situations. Right?
No, we're currently very far away from a gravity situation, but we just want to make sure that we never get there, because at the moment we're putting more and more objects in space every year. It's an exponential growth. So if we keep on that pattern without trying to find a long-term sustainable solution, we are at risk of getting there. So we're trying to kind of get ahead of the curve and prevent rather than cure.
So it sounds like really complex work. And I'm curious, how do you know where all of the satellites are to then add them into the ledger? What are some of the challenges associated with it?
Oh, there are a lot of challenges. The first one being we don't actually know where every single satellite is. Some satellites are up there for top secret reasons, where governments might put an object in space, and for very obvious reasons, they don't want people to know exactly what it's for or exactly where it is. For most commercial organizations, like the Starlink satellites that SpaceX send up, you can generally track where they are. There are websites that will tell you the positions of the satellites. And we generally currently track them using ground stations. So you might see giant radio satellite dishes, and they will be tracking signals that are broadcast by the satellites to know where they are. But there are issues with that. It's not totally accurate because there's obviously a delay in transmitting that information down to Earth. So by the time we get it, that satellite may have moved. And ground stations just aren't as accurate as they could be compared to having onboard sensor data that's kind of collected at source. And because of that, it means that our tolerance for collision avoidance is really high. So we have a much bigger distance that we won't tolerate than we actually need to, because we can't be 100% sure where those satellites are. So the UK Space Command issues warnings to UK-based satellite operators when there's a risk of collision. And they've just released their report for August, and they had over 2,000 near misses last month, which is an insane number and much more than the months previous in this year. So we can see that it's a really serious problem if that's just for UK-based operators. So by having something on board that can collect more accurate data, that might mean we actually end up sending less collision avoidance warnings. We're only focusing on those actual critical ones rather than trying to play a bit of a guessing game as to, is this really a problem or not?
Gosh, so do the collisions ever happen? Yeah, 2,000 near misses sounds like an
They are rare,
risk.
but they do happen. Yeah. So I can't remember exactly when it was, but the International Space Station a few years ago had a small puncture from a piece of space debris. Nobody was hurt. The astronauts patched it up and everything was fine. But it is very rare for it to happen just because orbit is still quite a large space, even with the tens of thousands of objects in there. And thankfully, when we do have a really high risk of collision, operators are pretty good at moving their assets out of the way. Obviously, they don't want their satellites being destroyed. So it doesn't happen very often, but the risk gets more and more as the population of orbit continues to grow.
Makes sense. So where is the technology at the moment? Is this your is it early research? Is it something that's getting used? Where
it is a really early area of research, yeah. So distributed ledgers first started coming about in 2008 with the launch of Bitcoin. And then there was a bit of a lull since then. Everybody used that architecture, and it wasn't till about 2015 that research started coming out on other forms of distributed ledger, and it's ballooned massively since then. There are hundreds of different cryptocurrencies, all of different architectures. There's also now applications of distributed ledger starting to come out that aren't cryptocurrencies, particularly in the world of the Internet of Things, IoT, where they're using distributed ledgers to store information from sensors that you might wear on your wrist or at home, and transmit that around to make like smart ecosystems and to automate things like smart cities. But that is within the last decade, so it's a really new area of research. And as for applying that to space, that's an even more niche sector. So research has only really started coming out in the last 5 years, so it is very new and very novel, and we're yet to see an actual application of it in space. We're only just starting to see it outside of finance. We're seeing it now a bit in IoT, in healthcare as well, for storing patient records. We're seeing it be used. I've even seen blockchain be used for looking at the provenance of ingredients for a Scottish gin company. So they will say, oh, our gin is organic and the ingredients come from here and here, and they're using blockchain to validate the authenticity of those ingredients and track them from source, and customers can go and see where that data is. So that's really new, and that makes it quite exciting. And also space, everyone thinks space is really cutting edge, and parts of it absolutely are. Satellite hardware in particular has come a long way in recent years, and we're able to launch a lot more now. But space governance and processes haven't changed much really since the 50s, when we started going into space a lot more. And at the moment, if there's collision avoidance warnings that I mentioned from Space Command, they're currently sent out by email to companies, and they just have to take, days, hours to respond. So it's a very slow, a very manual process.
So
then
what
somebody
happens
has
when
to...
someone gets that warning, like your satellite's on track to collide with another one?
Exactly. So
Can
it
they change
depends.
that? I mean, what can people actually do?
Well, so it depends. They will then assess the risk based on what they've been told. If they think it's fine, they won't do anything. And if they do say, okay, yeah, we do need to move, then most satellites come with some spare thruster fuel that they can use to slightly change their orbits to move either slightly higher or slightly lower and get out of the way of that piece of debris. Obviously, that is not infinite, so you have to be very careful, which is why they will assess the risk first and decide whether it's worth trying. But then they can send commands up to the satellite to activate those thrusters and move out of the way. But it's all very not very automated at all, very manual, relatively slow, which is why my project will hopefully automate that to prevent that delay.
Yeah, and that's really fascinating how, like you say, we all have this perception that space is like the most cutting edge of the cutting edge, but there's emails involved to move satellites around.
Exactly, yeah.
Mind-blowing. It's like, what if they're on holiday and they don't?
Well, exactly. What if they're on holiday? It is mind-blowing. It was something that I learned quite early on in my PhD, and I thought, wow, okay, this is how it still works. And so, yeah, we're starting to get there now, though. The technology is catching up.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it must be very gratifying to be working on something that's really going to make such a big difference to space safety and just quite cool tech as well to be working on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the best bit about engineering, I think, is working on something that actually has a positive impact. It's why I got into engineering in the first place.
So tell us some more about your article that you wrote in the BCS IT Now magazine that you mentioned about software testing in space.
Yeah, so that came out in the
All about.
September edition with Martin. And yeah, as you mentioned before, my previous career before I started my PhD was as a software tester working in safety critical software. And I don't think you can get more of a mission critical environment than space. You don't get
Sounds
chances
pretty
to
critical.
repeat things. Yeah. And it's very extreme. There's lots of temperature variations, radiation. If something goes wrong, you can't send somebody out to go and fix it. Like if a train breaks down, you can send an engineer, but that's not the case in space. And often there are, people's lives on the line if you've got a crewed station like the ISS or a crewed spacecraft. So it was a really great conversation with Martin Cooper over at IT Now. And we spoke a bit about the importance of software testing in those safety critical sectors and how, as a profession, software testing can often be forgotten about. Everybody knows about software developers and software engineers, but at least when I was at university, software testing was not a career that was advertised to me yet. It's really, really important, especially in those mission critical sectors where you can't afford for something to go wrong. You absolutely need a team of testers. But we also spoke a lot about the importance of diversity in testing. So I said that with testing teams, it's really important to have lots of people from different backgrounds, not just gender, race, disability, etc. Whilst those are all incredibly important and they bring their own perspectives, but also in terms of someone who might be a brand new tester who's only a few months into their career versus a senior tester who's got many decades of experience. They will look at something and see it completely differently, and that's the beauty. That's exactly what you want in a testing team, because you want to be able to cover as many scenarios as possible, not just the ones that you expect, but the ones that may be a bit more rare or someone's never thought of before, because otherwise you end up with really critical problems and it's much harder to solve them once they've already happened.
Now, I always think that testing is a really kind of fascinating field in that sense, that it's both very methodological and rigorous. That was surprisingly hard to say. Also really sort of creative and imaginative thinking. It's like you've got to be absolutely diligent about it, but at the same time just thinking in so many different ways of what might happen, and thinking around problems that could come that haven't been designed for yet.
Exactly. And that's something I think that I've brought over into academia, is that idea to think outside the box, think of something novel, because that's what you're trying to do in a PhD, is do something that no one's ever done before. And so that curiosity and tenacity you get as a software tester really translates well into being a PhD researcher.
Ah, that's interesting. So you found that there's some skill set transfer that you hadn't maybe considered, or maybe other people wouldn't have considered, going from software testing through into being PhD research.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, that's fascinating. We'll come back to that a little bit more. So should we wind back in your journey and think about, some of the steps that you have been through in your childhood, your education, that's actually led you to where you are now? You've done a very fascinating mix of things. What first drew you to space? Why space? What caught your attention
Well,
about that?
I think a bit of it was just luck and chance. I was really lucky where I grew up was just outside of Alice Holt Forest down in Hampshire, which is one of the best stargazing locations in the UK and definitely in the southeast. So it was a case of I could just go out into my garden, stare up and see hundreds of stars. And that is not the case everywhere. And I think if I'd been born somewhere with more light pollution, then who knows what path I would be on today. But I was really grateful just to be able to go lie down outside, stare up at space, and just let my mind wander at how big the universe is, how relatively small we are, having minor crises of wonder where you just think, oh gosh, what's our place in the universe? How come we think we're so important when the universe is so big? And then I remember being at secondary school and learning about Hubble expansion and the fact that the universe is constantly growing, and just thinking, how is that possible? How is there more of space to explore? And how are we ever going to fully understand everything that's out there if it's infinite and growing? And that just really made me want to understand as much as I could. It seemed like a bit of a challenge, or like a mountain I wanted to climb. So I've just always loved it, and then been further inspired by other events we've seen happen. So like when Tim Peake launched up to the International Space Station in 2015, I had just started my degree, and I remember sitting down and watching it live and getting so excited that we were sending another British astronaut up into space after Helen Sharman, and just seeing people go to space as that exciting frontier, and all the brilliant technology and research that comes out of that continually inspires me. And yeah, I just love it.
It shines through. So you went to university to study physics and astrophysics, and that was the first time anyone in your family had actually been to university to study, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
What was that experience like for you?
Honestly, it was quite difficult. Not having any role models to look up to, or anybody who I could ask, what is university like, is really challenging. Because otherwise I found that going to university, at least back when I started in 2015, was quite opaque. I did have my teachers, my A-level physics teachers were wonderful, and I went to them with questions, and they were able to answer sort of more of the technical side of what would my course be like, and how would I be graded, and how do lectures work. But from the social side, it's really difficult if you don't have somebody that's been through it maybe recently or at all, to understand how drastic that change is. Like being 18 years old, moving away from home for first time. I went to the University of Bath, which is about 3 hours from where I grew up. And there's a lot to adjust to. There's a lot of people from lots of different backgrounds to you. It's a completely different structure because you're fully independent and responsible for your learning, and it's up to you what you choose to do with your day. And the first maybe 6-7 weeks I found really, really difficult. I remember ringing my mum pretty much daily, begging her to come and bring me home, telling her I'd made a mistake, that I couldn't do this was the wrong choice. And bless her, I can't imagine how hard it was for her to have her child ringing her and telling her, please come and pick me up, and having to say no. But I am so grateful she consistently said no. She knows me better than anybody. She knew I needed to be there. And she didn't come and pick me up. And about 3 months into my first year, I had settled in and I ended up loving my degree. It was one of the best decisions I ever made, was to go and study. And I am so grateful to my mum that she left me there whilst I was struggling, even though at the time I was not grateful to her at all. But yeah, it definitely is harder than a lot of people give it credit for. So if anybody is thinking of going to university and is the first person going, just be prepared for that. See if you can get any support from anyone else. I would like to think that it's been 9 years since I started university, so I would hope there's more support out there for people now. But even when it is tough, stick it out, because it will be worth it. Do not give up.
Yeah, it's obviously formed quite a foundation to what you've been able to go on to now with your PhD. But astrophysics and space wasn't what you did straight away, was it, after university?
No, I took a bit of a windy path to get here. So yeah, I did my astrophysics degree and I graduated in 2019 with my bachelor's. I'd originally actually signed up to do a master's program at Bath, but within the first couple of months where I was having this sort of crisis about should I even be at university, I dropped down onto a bachelor's program because I thought I just want to get this degree over and done with as quickly as possible. So yeah, 2019 and coming around to graduation, and I'm in my final year, and I've picked a module called computational astrophysics, which was optional. And I purely picked it because it didn't have an exam. It was coursework assessed and I had enough exams and I wanted something different to do. And I thought that coding sounded interesting. I coded for the first time at university. We had to do Python and C in our computing labs. I had enjoyed it, so I thought, let's go do that. And I also assumed that other people who had taken that module were like me, who had minimal programming experience, and maybe we'd get quite a lot of support. That was not the case. There were about 20 people who took computational astrophysics that year. There were 2 women, myself and my friend Tejal, and pretty much everyone there coded in their spare time. Like it was a hobby. They were all relatively strong programmers and knew what they were doing. And that was the assumption that our lecturer had as well, was that you knew what you were doing. So I was way over my head and quite out of my depth, but thankfully made friends with people on the course who knew more than me, and they got me through it. And I ended up getting a first in that module, which was fantastic.
Oh, that's amazing.
And ignited my love of programming. I decided I really wanted to do this. I loved that I was doing something tangible that I could see with my own eyes. We were programming the orbital motion of comets around the Earth, and we were programming how photons move from the cores of stars right out through the fluids of the star out to the surface. And I was like, this is amazing. Like, I've only been programming a couple of months and I can do all of this. Like, imagine what else I could do. So I thought, I want to be a software engineer. I'm going to go do that. But then looking for graduate jobs was really difficult because they often required a computer science degree or something like that. So I was getting rejected off the bat the minute they saw my CV and it only had a tiny bit of programming. And that was quite disheartening because I just found this career I really wanted to do and couldn't do it. And that was until I found a graduate apprenticeship at a company called Altran, who are now called Capgemini Engineering, based down in Bath. And they had a graduate apprenticeship for people that had STEM-based degrees that were not computer science or software engineering. And they would train you on a BCS accredited scheme to learn software development for a year and a half. So you would work full-time 4.5 days a week and then spend half a day a week training for your apprenticeship and learn a bit more about formal programming and computer science. And that was my way into what I love doing, which is coding. So I did that until 2021 and then stayed on at Capgemini Engineering, where I was a consultant and a test lead. So being a consultant, I was, put on a range of different projects in lots of different sectors, but it was all mission critical and safety critical software. So my first project was working on emergency brakes for trains based up in Scandinavia. So making sure that they were operating safely with things like landslides and really crazy conditions. But once I finished my apprenticeship, I said to my manager that I actually miss space quite a lot. And if there are any space projects that come up, like, please let me know. I would absolutely love to get on one. And then there happened to be an opportunity for a test lead role, which was a step up for me, working on the Iridium satellite constellation, which is a network of 66 satellites orbiting the Earth that provide global coverage for Wi-Fi and voice services. So if you're in the North Pole, for example, and you need to use a satellite phone to call for help, it is likely you'll be connecting to the Iridium constellation. Or if you're out on a big cargo ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and you need to have Wi-Fi, you will likely have an Iridium transceiver on your ship so that you can connect to the internet. So I got to spend an incredible year and a half working on that project, and it reignited that love of space. I was like, oh, this is exactly what I meant to do. This is wonderful. And then life comes in the way. So I was living down in the southwest at the time and then moved up to the northeast because I bought a house. So I needed to get a new job. I couldn't keep my one at the time. So I made a transition into a different mission critical area, looking at the safety of oil and gas pipelines. But leaving that space project behind, kind of, you don't know what you're missing till it's gone. And so I was like, oh, I love my job. I love software testing, don't get me wrong, but that space element just fulfilled me in a way that nothing else can. So then I was like, okay, what do I do? And I'd been thinking about doing a PhD pretty much since I graduated. It was my original game plan. Why I went to go to university was to become Dr. Prober at the time. But then because of my self-confidence, I decided not to. And I thought, actually, you know what? I would really, really like to do it. And it was a chance conversation with a friend that happened about a year ago, actually, almost to the day, where we were chatting about what I wanted for my future. And I said, I need to go do this PhD because time is going to run out eventually. Life will get in the way again, and now is the perfect time. But I was a bit nervous because I hadn't done my master's, and my friends who had done PhDs all had masters, and I knew it was going to be difficult. So I got in touch with the alumni careers team at Bath, who are superb, and went to them and said, I've got my bachelor's, I've got 5 years of programming. Do you reckon I even stand a chance at getting onto a space-based PhD? And thankfully they said yes. And I found this wonderful PhD, which I'm now doing at the University of Strathclyde. And I kind of had to shoot my shot a little bit because I looked at this PhD and it didn't necessarily specify whether you needed a master's or not. So I just emailed the supervisor and said, hi, this is who I am. I have a bachelor's. I have this coding experience. Would you even consider me? And he replied within, I think, 2 hours, so really quick, and was like, yeah, absolutely, send us your CV. And within 4 weeks, I had my offer on my PhD, and I'm really grateful to be fully funded for that. So I didn't need to go and look for money. And now I'm 6 months in and just absolutely loving it. And I feel like this is where I was meant to be the whole time. I think taking that windy road has taught me a lot. I developed a lot of technical skills like my programming and my software testing, but I've also developed a lot of softer skills. Like I'm really good at being self-driven in project management, which is something you need in research. So actually, if I had started it as a fresh undergraduate when I was 22, I don't know if I'd have enjoyed it as much as I'm enjoying it now, having kind of seen the other side of what life is like without it. So
Yeah. Oh, I can definitely understand and relate to, a lot of that. I studied for a master's alongside working, and actually very lovely to go back to academia, but very much a different experience doing it, having had some work experience already, because you've got so much that you can bring into it from that context, from being in industry as well as, all of the taught content from your bachelor's. So how have you found the comparison between working in industry and studying for a PhD? What's that been like?
well, the pay is a lot worse. It's probably the most obvious thing.
Not recommended on the pay.
No, don't go into academia if you want to be rich. It's not the industry for you. And you don't get any benefits like, healthcare and things. But I don't have to pay council tax, and I do get student discount again. So, swings and roundabouts
A
in
few
it.
benefits.
But in terms of the actual work, because I was a consultant before, there's actually quite a lot of similarities, because with a consultant, you are expected to be an expert in something, and your knowledge is what brings value. And that is exactly the same in academia. It's just rather than having a client and billables and milestones and all of that additional pressure from project managers and sales teams, I am the client as well as the consultant. Like ultimately, if I don't do my research, I am the only one that's affected. I'm letting myself down. So it's up to me to set my own milestones, to set my own goals, and kind of push myself forward and be that expert. But it's nice not to have to do a timesheet at all. I can just decide how I spend each day. There's a lot more flexibility in research than there is in the private sector, because you're not dependent on anybody else. Your research is your own. So as long as I attend my scheduled meetings with my research group and my supervisor, the rest of it I can set up my day as I like, which really suits me because I'm a night owl. So I do not like to start work in the mornings. I'd much rather work till quite late at night and then start later. But everybody gets their own choice. There are PhD researchers in my group that like to start at 7 a.m. and finish early, and it's really nice, and it suits people who might have other commitments or might have children, for example, because they can kind of move their hours around to what suits them. I'll also say it's working in academia is actually the most gender balanced environment I've worked in since finishing university, which is not what I expected at all.
That's very surprising, especially in
Yeah.
like a field like space technology. It doesn't immediately leap out as being one that's going to be gender balanced.
No, exactly. So in my group, there's 4 men and 3 women, and there was 3 and 3 until we recently got a new postdoc. But my supervisor put a lot of effort into making sure that he recruits people from a range of backgrounds and creates a really friendly environment where people want to be. And it's so refreshing compared to being in the private sector, where I was often the only woman in a team of 20. And so actually having other people that can relate to me and share my experience of what it can be like to be a woman in STEM is wonderful, and it kind of just happens organically, and I really like that. But I will say that is not the case everywhere in academia. I think I have gotten quite fortunate. So yeah, there's a lot of similarities with consultancy, but a bit more freedom and autonomy than people who work in the private sector might be used to.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for anyone who might be thinking about doing a PhD? How do you find your way to a PhD? It's a completely unknown area to me. How do you even
Yeah.
start?
Well, my first piece of advice is it's never too late. It does not matter. You do not have to be fresh out of an undergraduate degree to do a PhD. Like I said, I graduated 5 years ago and then have come back, and I've met other people who have started their PhDs in their 40s, their 50s, once their children have moved out and they want to get back into research. So don't rule yourself out because of the stage of life that you're in. You can absolutely always go back as long as you've got an undergraduate degree. So how I found my degree is there are lots of sites. One I can recommend is findaphd.com, where it's kind of like Indeed for jobs, but for PhDs, where universities will list the projects that they have, and you can filter it by whether they're funded or not. It's easier for you if they are fully funded, because then you don't have to go and approach funding bodies to look for that money to pay for you to do the research, and you'll just get the standard stipend. But fully funded PhDs are obviously more competitive. There are more people that will be vying for that spot. So do be prepared to go through sort of a more traditional interview process. So like for mine, I had to send in an academic CV, which is different to a corporate CV. So make sure you understand the differences, speak to people and get help. And then I had a online interview, which was kind of standard, just asking questions about myself, my experience, my motivation. But if you want to go down the self-funded route, you absolutely can. There are lots of funding bodies, especially for STEM PhDs, like the ESPRC and UKRI, that you can approach for funding if you have an idea. Because if you go down the funded route, you are limited to what that project scope is. You don't get any say in what the project is. Whereas if you go down the self-funded route because you have a great idea that you really want to research, then that's something else you can do too. It's also important to remember you don't always need a master's. Sometimes you do, and normally the funders will specify what kind of prerequisites you need, but don't rule yourself out because you don't think you're qualified. Things like work experience, apprenticeships, other equivalent experiences and qualifications can absolutely be as valid as a master's, or you may not even need one. And the last thing I'll say is that obviously PhDs, there is a big financial hit. The current stipend we get paid is about £19,000 a year. So it's not a lot of money. And I know that that's not accessible to everybody. I was really fortunate to be in a position where I could afford to drop down my pay. Obviously, coming from the tech sector, I was being paid a lot more before that. But if that's not an option for you to go full time, have a look at part-time PhDs. They do take a bit longer because you haven't got as much time, but that helps spread out the cost a little bit, allows you to work. Or you can see if work will sponsor some PhDs. So I have a few friends where their employers pay for their fees and then pay them a salary on top of that because the research is relevant to what they're doing at work. So have a look at other options that are available to you.
No, that's brilliant, Beth. Thank you. That's lots and lots of good kind of advice and kind of practical kind of experience, what you've just shared. So let's come back to something you mentioned just before we talked about that, which was around being a woman in STEM and diversity in STEM being really important. And I know that's something that you've done loads and loads of work on. You've been helping people to enter and, to progress in their STEM careers in lots of different ways. So you've been part of the Wise Young Professionals Board. You've run some women's networks, and, being on the SIGiST committee, we see you as a very active kind of role model as well. So can you tell us a little bit about what makes that so important for you and some of the things that you've been doing?
Yeah. What makes it important for me is I hate that even now in 2024 that people are put off of following their dreams because of things like their gender, their race, their sexuality, their disabilities. Because none of those attributes make anyone any more or less qualified for an opportunity or a job or any less able to follow a dream that they have. And I find it really frustrating because growing up, I had a lot of those comments when I went to my secondary school physics teacher and said I would like to study physics and be a scientist. He said, oh, well, there's a shortage of teachers. Have you thought about teaching? I think you'd make a good teacher. And that just wasn't a comment that any of the boys in my class ever received. And we're all constantly fighting against the fact that people assume things about you based on what you look like and what your background is. And I just find it really frustrating. And so I get a lot of energy from fighting back against those assumptions, because I want to make sure that I was quite lucky that I had the right support around me to get me to where I am. But I know that a lot of women in particular, as my sort of most relatable experience, are put off chasing their dreams in STEM because of comments that they've had as a child that have stuck with them, or lack of support from family, or lack of support from teachers. And I think people should be able to follow their passions. I know that I am massively fulfilled by doing that. And I hate knowing that people are going through their lives not doing what they're supposed to because of something that someone said to them. And I also know how important for women communities and relationships are in giving you that final push to go and take that leap. Like I said before, it was a chance conversation with a friend last year where they said that they believed in me and that I could do it, actually got me to get up and submit that application because I had all of that self-doubt. So that's why I like to be involved in things like the Wise Young Professionals Board, the SIGiST committee, where it's these groups of people, these communities that come together to support people. I also like to mentor. I have a couple of mentees and I mentored myself, because I think those relationships really help bring out encouragement in people and can inspire them to, you know, say, actually, I believe in you, you can do this, I want to help you, I want to open those doors for you. And that is huge in improving diversity. If you've got somebody who can kind of hold the door open and let you in, it makes things a lot easier. And I think it's something that we all should be putting effort into, not just women. I think men can also help champion women up, absolutely. And I think it's something that men need to get more confident in doing. But yeah, I think it's something we all need to do, because diversity only benefits STEM in particular, but all sectors, because it just brings in new ideas, new perspectives that we wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, well, I totally share your passion on that. It's been one of those driving motivators for me as well, I guess, to help to show, you know, we can all have really fulfilling careers in STEM and in tech and in science. And it's brilliant to see people like you really role modeling what that can look like, and hearing from you about how some of that works behind the scenes as well. So thinking about your career a bit more holistically, what do you think has been your biggest motivator? What gives you energy in what you do?
I think my biggest motivator is that I genuinely love what I do. I wake up and I get to think that, oh, I get to go read some space research today. Like, what more could I want to do with my day? And I think because I've seen the other side of it, I've had that career where I wasn't 100% fulfilled, and now I've taken that chance on myself and I'm doing it. So I want to make sure I get the most out of every single second. And so that keeps me going, even when it's difficult or I've hit a challenge. I'm thinking, well, actually, remember what your life was like beforehand, remember how you feel now, and remember how worth it's going to be in the future. And then when I do have those good days, I'm like, oh yes, this is why I'm here, I genuinely love it, it's always what I've meant to do, and I want to make the most of it.
Is there anything that surprised you on your journey, you know, on this wiggly
Ah,
path you've taken?
yeah, I was reflecting on this earlier, and I think I mentioned it briefly before, but it's how many skills I've picked up over the years that have been relevant to my PhD career that I didn't even realize. So things like with SIGiST, I look after our social media, so I do a bit of graphic design for that, and that's really helped me in designing posters for conferences to communicate my research to people. Obviously, things like time management and project management in consultancy has led to me being much more self-driven and organized and able to plan my week effectively. Public speaking is a skill that I didn't really think you needed so much in academia. I thought I had a lot of misconceptions that have been proven wrong. I thought most people in academia just kind of sat there and wrote things all day, but actually there's lots of opportunities to collaborate with other people and speak at conferences. So having developed public speaking as a skill has opened lots of doors for me. And like I mentioned before, that curiosity mindset of what can I try next? Have I thought outside the box? Is there something I've not considered? Really helps with academia, because you're trying to find those little gaps in research where you can add some value. So being that bit tenacious, that bit silly, and seeing things in a creative way has really helped. But until I was reflecting on this question earlier, I didn't actually realize quite how many skills I'd picked up, because I think you just do through life. And yeah, it's really surprised me, because I now feel that I'm in the best position now to be doing what I'm doing, and kind of that everything's fallen into place at the right moment.
Yeah, no, that's really amazing how, you know, you can see the different pieces that have come together from, you know, what could be completely disparate things that you've done, but actually it all builds into that picture of what you're doing now and how it really strengthens you doing it. Oh, I love that answer, Beth. That's really cool. So you've won lots of awards, you've had lots of recognition for the good work that you've been doing. You were a finalist in the IET's Young Women Engineer of the Year. You're one of Computer Weekly's persistent women who are influential in tech, and you won the Rising Star a couple of years back, I think. And then also the Every Woman in Technology Rising Star Award, which is amazing.
Thank
Congratulations.
you.
And very well deserved from everything you've talked about today. I think that everyone here will see exactly why you have been recognized, you know, so well for the work that you're doing. What's it meant to you? What's it mean to you of having this recognition?
Well, I think of course all that recognition gives you a massive self-confidence boost when
Yeah.
you see that your efforts are being seen by people in the industry who I look at and go, wow, you're amazing. And then they've noticed me, and it feels very almost awkward. It's just a bit like, oh, it's just me. I'm just doing my job. because obviously that's not why anyone gets into STEM. They don't do it to come out with these accolades and awards, but it's really lovely to be recognized. And yeah, I'm very grateful for all of those opportunities, because it's nice having the awards. I like the trophies, it's great. But it's also given me opportunities to meet incredible other people. So other people that were finalists for the awards, I've stayed in touch with pretty much all of them. So you have these communities of incredibly driven people, like-minded people who can support each other. It also means that I'm able to support people who also want to apply for those awards, because I've been through the process. So it's given me an opportunity to kind of give back and support the next generation of people coming up that are going to be applying for those awards. And honestly, I think, well, coming back to that point about awkwardness, I think a lot of women who do get awarded or recognized for things often do feel a bit, they don't like being in the spotlight. They don't want to toot their own horn so much. I think women are often raised to be a bit more humble and coy and not shout about their achievements. And I kind of love just being able to break that down and say, no, absolutely own it. Like, if you're doing really well in your job and you're doing something amazing and inspiring people, why shouldn't you be celebrated? You should be celebrating yourself. And I love encouraging people to apply for awards and have their moment in the spotlight, because I think it's great to see what so many amazing women are doing and see them be championed through things like awards.
Oh, that's brilliant. And sometimes, the things that people just say to us can land as a real kind of spark, something that's really meaningful. And so my next question is, what's the best compliment you've ever received?
I don't have one specific one, but the general theme of them is your enthusiasm is infectious, or you're a keen bean, is something that my friends call me quite often. Because I remember that in year 2 or 3, when I was really small, primary schools tend to give out certificates for little tiny achievements, and I got one for being enthusiastic. That was the first time I'd ever had that compliment. I was about 7 years old, so I didn't know what the word meant, but it was very exciting. And then since then, like even you mentioned it earlier, Jo, that my enthusiasm for things comes off.
Yeah.
And I love that compliment. I love being told that, because I love that my passion is appreciated and that it can inspire others to be as excited about something as I am, and maybe give them a push to do something or just improve their day. But yeah, I love being called enthusiastic and keen. And some people don't. They might say, oh, you don't want to be coming off too strong. I'm like, no, absolutely. I'm going to give it my all and show my energy.
So we're nearly at the end of our planned questions now. I've just got a few quick fire questions to finish with. So I'm sure everyone feels like that they've got to know you really well through this session. So can you tell us something unexpected about you that we don't know yet?
So this was something that I asked this question to the others in my group, my research group earlier, and they said it was very surprising that I'm a PhD student who doesn't drink coffee.
You don't drink coffee? That is unexpected.
Yeah, no, I don't drink coffee. I used to, like back when I was 18, I was drinking coffees and Red Bulls like they were going out of fashion. But then I actually gave up caffeine a few years ago to try and be a bit healthier. And they don't know how I do it. They're like, how do you have so much energy? But the answer is sweets. I eat
sugar
my
instead.
dentist loves and hates me because I have quite a lot of sugar to get through my day and have a massive sweet tooth. But yeah, often people say, oh, you must, drink so much coffee to get all your work done. But no, not for me.
Oh, no coffee at all. Well, that disrupts my next question, which was going to be, if you could have a coffee with someone famous, who would it be? But you can substitute a different drink or some Chewits.
I would absolutely have a hot chocolate. It is my favorite hot drink with whipped cream and marshmallows. And I would love to have a hot chocolate with Brian May, the guitarist from Queen, because he has a doctorate in astrophysics, and is obviously the guitarist for one of the greatest bands to have ever existed ever. And I think he breaks down a lot of stereotypes for what it means to be a scientist, and kind of has the best of both worlds. He's actively still making music, but then is also a visiting researcher, and manages to be great at both. So it kind of shows that you don't have to pigeonhole yourself to just one interest. And I really like that. I'd also just like to see him play live. I know they did a tour with Adam Lambert a few years ago, which I would have loved to have gone to. So if they tour again, I'm absolutely getting tickets. But I think he'd just be so interesting to talk to.
Yeah. Oh, lovely answer. Yeah. Physicist and musician all at once is a rare combo.
Yeah.
So final question, what's next? What are your hopes for the future, Beth?
Oh, it's a scary question to ask a PhD student what's next, and most would run away at that question. So I'm funded for the next 3 years. So I should finish my PhD in about 3.5 years, so graduate in 4 years' time. So that's at least sorted for now. We'll just be focusing on my research and getting my doctorate. But my current goal after finishing that is to hopefully get a postdoctoral research position, whether that's at Strathclyde or somewhere else. I don't know. It's not necessarily in my hands. It depends where the funding is. But I would love to continue building on my research. I 100% am staying in the space sector. It's growing quite a lot in the UK. The UK Space Agency has just opened a number of new offices, including one up in Edinburgh, which isn't too far. And the Scottish space sector is also growing. We now have a new spaceport that's just opened recently. So I think it's a really exciting country to be in, to be working in the space sector. So that's definitely in my future. But what exactly that looks like is a bit up in the air for now. And that's quite exciting.
Oh, that's wonderful. And Beth, is there any guidance that you'd like to leave our audience with? Some closing thoughts, maybe?
I think my main piece of guidance is trust your gut and trust your instincts. If it feels like this isn't the career for you, you may well be right. And likewise, if you're in a career and you love it, but then you're having an off day, but you're something inside you goes, no, you're meant to be here, keep at it, then do keep at it. I think it's really easy to talk yourself out of things or let fear get in the way of doing what you're supposed to do. So yeah, trust your gut.
Trust your gut. Wonderful. Beth, thank you so much. It's been absolutely brilliant to talk to you and to feel the infectious energy firsthand. And
Thank you, Jo.
Massive thank you to you. So it's now time that we can hand over to our audience for some Q&A. So let's have a look and see what's going on in the chat. And if anybody has got a question you'd like to raise your hand, you can type in the chat or you can raise your hand and we can talk directly. Right, let me read the comments that we've had during
I've just seen the first one. I've met developers and managers that think testing is a waste of time. That is something I hear all too often, is, especially project managers complaining that, oh, this testing is delaying our delivery, and actually, can we just get this done faster to get our milestone out? And it's a really difficult battle, and one that I think is universal across the tech sector. But then we saw recently, with the large CrowdStrike outage that happened, where millions of computers were taken down. If they had more thorough testing processes, that may not have happened, or may not have happened to such a scale. So I think it's difficult to quantify the value of testing because it prevents bad stuff happening, rather than actually bringing in revenue like sales do. But then when you see when it goes wrong, how wrong it could go, I think testing speaks for itself.
Be enormous.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yes, we also have a comment from Stephen. I think it's a big issue with the teaching at university. Excuse me, I obviously can't actually read today. Is that many lecturers really want to be researchers? Yeah, I certainly remember back when I was a student first time around that was a huge issue. The lecturers to be doing.
I think it absolutely can be. I know Strathclyde do things a bit differently. They have a few different tracks that researchers can take, where you could either be 99% teaching with very little research if you just really want to be a lecturer. You can be the traditional mixture of a bit of research and a bit of teaching, or you can just be research focused, whether that's academic research or partnering with industry companies to do some research for them. So there's a bit of an option for everyone, which is quite exciting. So I hope that might be more popular in the future and give me some options to look at.
Yeah, that's always good to have options. I mean, not everyone is going to be cut out or have the preference to do all of the different possibilities. So
exactly,
why does everyone have to do everything? It makes much more sense to actually have a bit of division there. So B says, loving hearing about how much of yourself you bring to your research.
Thank you, B.
And a comment from Christine. Just going to scan quickly. Can I read this out, Christine? Are you fine for me to read out your comment? I will read out the comment. So Christine says, I'm a few years ahead of you. In 1970, the job centre asked me if I knew banks were getting computers. At that time, BCS was sending me a magazine, no internet back then. Yes, I knew they had them in HQ. Very proudly, they told me they had a bank job for me as a bank cashier. Ah! So the the pigeonholing and the small ambition that other people can have, I think, can be quite infuriating, can't they, when it's applied to you. So good job by the look of it. Christine has managed to have a different career from a bank cashier. So Christina goes on to say, said magazine had job adverts. I followed one, had a day trip from Durham to London, and returned home to tell my parents I had a trainee programming job.
Yay!
So Dad asked where and said, the Wicked City. Yes, apparently I am a bloody minded woman.
Oh, good for you, Christine. I'm chuffed to hear that. Well done.
So Perul says, as space economy is going to triple by 2030, how can we ensure there is a woman representation there? Lesson learned from the tech economy when we have to push the representation.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And that question, I wish there was a silver bullet answer, because I think if there was, we'd have it by now. But I think what my supervisor does, at least, to meant that our research group has equal numbers is like connecting people together. So when I applied for my PhD, he immediately connected me with his students so that I could learn from them, and see that they were like me and see that they came from different backgrounds, which is also something that I like, is just having that visibility of people that took different paths. So not every researcher in my group went straight from their undergraduate to a PhD. I obviously took a gap. Another researcher in my group, Josh, he took a gap in his education as well. So we've got some similarity there. And I think just actually being vocal about those differences makes a huge change, because the space industry and STEM as a whole still has this problem with being seen as elitist. Like, you must be a brilliant genius to work in this sector, and if you're anything less than that, then you're not deserving and you're not cut out for it. And that just really isn't the case at all. I mean, looking at me, when I did AS physics back when I was a teenager, I actually got a D in AS physics the first time I sat it, and then had some very kind grace from my teacher that allowed me to get a higher predicted grade, and then resat my exams. And so you don't need to be a genius. I'm certainly not one. You will have to work hard and want it. And I think showcasing that really helps encourage diversity, showing that actually that image problem isn't true, that there are a range of people out there. And events like this can obviously help with that too. And groups like BCS Women that actively try and champion people from different backgrounds. It's not going to solve everything, because sadly there will still be women who have those interactions when they're younger that will just put them off for life, those comments from people. And we need to do more to try and stop that happening at such a young age. There's plenty of research out there that shows that gender stereotypes can be enforced from as young as 6 years old in children through things like their toys and comments from their teachers. And the boys will go play rugby and the girls will go do something else. And so there's a big systematic problem that needs to be addressed, and that's going to take a really long time. It definitely won't be gender equal by 2030. I think that would be very optimistic, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. So we've just got to keep going.
Yeah, keep working on it. Absolutely agree. Now, have we got any more questions? Would anybody else like to raise a hand or type a question into the chat for Beth? Give you all a minute. So while you're thinking about it, I'll read out Christine's most recent comment. So she says, I read a library book in 1958 about the creation of the Leo. I've been a geek since then.
Ah, amazing. Yeah, that's so good, Christine. Yeah, I think sometimes with space, you just have that one interaction that sets off something in you, and then there's no turning back from there.
You're hooked from then on.
Yeah, I think so. Especially with, we have a lot more space-based films coming out. It's a lot more popular. You see films like we mentioned Gravity already and Interstellar. And space is becoming a lot more sort of popular domain now, which is really exciting and hopefully inspiring a few more people to get into it too.
Absolutely. All right, well, I don't see any more questions, so let's wrap up there. And I'll say thank you again, Beth. It's been absolutely wonderful having you as a guest, and hearing all about your career journey and your enthusiasm and your knowledge and your expertise about space and testing. It's been wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you for having me, and thank you to BCS North London and BCS Women for arranging this. It's amazing.